HELM? When and where is it taking place?
Okay, JADE HELM is a brand new exercise that's beginning in June. It includes about 1,200 special operations troops. It's going to span a good portion of the Southwest, Texas, Utah, Southern California, a lot of the other areas in between. And I mean, really what the military says they're looking to do is kind of work on how they interact around the public. Some of it is covert. They'll be in civilian attire and just trying to blend in. They've done other exercises that are similar, but this one kind of sticks out because it's the scope and size of it is a little bit larger.
And why is the scope and size larger? Why is it different from other ones they've done in the past?
A number of the other exercises, you'll see 100 troops or 200 troops or something like that. But what they say is that they're looking to prepare for long-range inserts where you'll take a helicopter from, for the sake of argument, Utah and land it in Texas. Or things along those lines. I mean, they're trying to prepare for future operations that may or may not come up overseas. And I think we can take them at face value on a lot of that.
Is there specific places that they're expecting to fight overseas that they're trying to recreate in some of these states where the exercises are taking place? They
would never tell you which operations they're preparing for, but I mean, I think we can safely say that they read the news, they're tracking the events just like everyone else. So yes, they're looking at where they may operate in the future. So I mean, when we talk about where the military is likely to deploy, they're always they're always trying to be aware of where they may be needed in the Middle East, Africa. They're pivoting to the Pacific and doing more there all the time. So I think really any of the above could be possible.
And why is this particular exercise raising concern among people who are worried about what the military is doing in this country?
I think it really comes down to the way this news first came out in March. There were briefing slides that were posted on the internet with a real lack of context. I thought, it was cast as this devious exercise that if it wasn't going to be martial law this summer, it was going to be something where that they're setting the stage for future martial law. And I think a lot of us who cover the military, spend time around the military, we really have a hard time seeing that. There are things where you can look at it and say, hey, they didn't really tell the truth on this or that, the way a war is going or something like that. But this exercise seems pretty routine.
Explain this map that is the cause of a lot of this concern. Here's a recreation of the map. The labels of different states in red labeled as hostile, blue permissive, and then uncertain in brown. Explain this map.
Yeah, that map is, they're kind of setting the stage for what they plan to do. So one of the things that really caused some concern is that they did label Texas, Utah, and a part of California as potentially hostile. Really, that's a rehearsal. That's preparation. That's make believe in a lot of ways. They set the stage for what they might have to do in a fictional country, and they will plan around that in this exercise. A couple of years back, I covered an exercise called Bold Alligator, and it was sort of the same scheme. They had an assault that went ashore from the Atlantic Ocean, and you had, they call it the Treasure Coast scenario, and you had the same sort of thing where a portion of the southeast was labeled as a potentially unsafe area for American troops. They're just trying to work around. Okay, we need to pick a place, prepare for it, assault it, and take over it. It's all a dress rehearsal. It's not to be taken seriously, I think, in most people's eyes that track these issues seriously.
And talk about some of the reaction from elected officials to JADE HELM 15. The governor of Texas submitting a letter to the Texas State Guard, essentially putting them on alert to watch this training exercise. A bit from Governor Greg Abbott's letter that we can read for our viewers. During the training operation, it is important that Texans know that their safety, constitutional rights, private property rights, and civil liberties will not be infringed. By monitoring the operation on a continual basis, the State Guard will facilitate communications between my office and the commanders of the Operation JADE HELM to ensure that adequate measures are in place to protect Texans.
I mean, I read that letter, and I think a lot of people tracking, the military read that letter and said he's trying to play a middle ground here between taking, the concerns seriously, as far-fetched as they may be, and just doing nothing. So he looked and said, hey, if we're going to have hundreds or whatever troops in my state, I think it's important to know what they're doing. I'd like to have communication with local authorities. That, I think, is fair. But where the concerns were raised and where he has received some mockery is by using the Texas Guard as opposed to local police or something else like that, which is common. It had the appearance of, okay, well, I'm going to use my troops to watch your troops. And I mean, I don't know if that was the best message to send.
What is the conspiracy for those who think that there is a conspiracy going on here, though?
I mean, there's a range here. One of the most common is that, the American military is going to take over a portion of the Southwest this year, just take it over. And in particular, Texas has been labeled as an area that's hostile, and Texas is an area that, they're going to come in, they're probably going to take our guns. I mean, all the sorts of things that you would expect in a federal government takeover. But there's no real sense that would happen. And at the same time, you look at the numbers of troops, 1,200 troops spread out over the span of 6-7 states. I mean, that doesn't really give you any kind of, manpower to do that sort of thing.
Our phone lines are open for those who want to talk about JADE HELM 15. The lines, Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002, and a special line for Texas residents 202-748-8003. We'll start with Dan in Texas, Markham, Texas. Dan, you're up first.
Yes.
Start with Dan in Texas, Markham, Texas. Dan, you're up first.
Yes. I'm a Vietnam vet. I served in our military during Vietnam, a security specialist. Smithsville, when they had this town meeting with these people, they said that the commander used the excuse that they were using this for their terrain. The only problem is we got bases all over the United States, and most of the time when we do these exercises, they'd fly us to these areas that we need to practice in. And so actually they're lying to the people that they need to use the terrain for these training exercises. We was always flown to where we need to be trained for whatever area we was going into. And so this is not true what the military or what they're saying to the public.
So, Dan, the concern is about the military using public lands and private lands as part of this exercise, as opposed to just keeping this to the military facilities around this country?
Yeah, I don't really understand what their reason is for these exercises. That's why people think that it's going to be a takeover, because Obama does not like Texas. Matter of fact, the states that are standing up to Washington on our borders, this is grounds for the federal government to come in and try to do something against the people.
Dan Lamothe, if you want to jump in.
Yeah.
Is this for enemies outside of the U.S.? Or are they doing this to protect our borders? Are they doing this because they're planning martial law? I mean, believe me, there are a lot of conspiracy theories right now. I mean, this is like JADE HELM. Remember JADE HELM, how everybody was having a conspiracy theory about JADE HELM? Everybody had an idea what JADE HELM was. They thought it was some sort of a martial law plan that was being put together. We saw it as a Raytheon plan where AI was speaking to commanders. They were using, it's the first time they introduced artificial intelligence into the combat zone. And they went into cities that they said would be problem cities. like Los Angeles, places like Texas, places like Utah. They went into all these areas and they were working on these areas and they were saying, these are some problem cities. And we were even looking into the idea that the Smart Cities Network, which are UN troops that are supposed to be dispatched if there's any problem in the United States, there are certain cities that have signed up for the Smart Cities Network, where UN troops are or can be called in to bring order to areas if there's ever a state of emergency. Now, you may say to yourself, well, this is all an old conspiracy theory, Clyde. This is a big conspiracy theory. You know, the idea of the FEMA camps. I mean, Alex Jones covered this. I mean, I can hear everybody saying, this is old stuff. Well, yeah, it's old stuff. REX 84, if you remember, was old stuff. That was the idea of gathering people, mass gathering of people by the military and by police and putting them in camps. But see, REX 84 would be implemented if there was a rush from the border of immigrants. Now, we've been
privacy dangers, a danger of being murdered by some external police authority that's not from this country. So, I mean, you can go back to JADE HELM, for example. The JADE HELM exercises that were held all over the United States, a lot of people don't know that they were actually being used in order to enforce this new advanced form of policing in the country. Now, JADE HELM 15, those exercises were not going to create the need for martial law, but they were there to prepare for a more proficient police force to apply what is called Operation Analysis Wargaming, nonlinear warfare that we talked about, hybrid warfare that we talked about the other night, and the JADE holographic imaging in order to find extremists and then to generate human terrain systems in geographic population-centric locations to identify and eliminate targets, insurgents, rebels, resistors, combatants, whatever the labels they want to be putting out there, domestic terrorists, all of this put into a global information grid and then used for network-centric warfare environments. Now, I'm sure that the need for the monitoring of urban settings is where they focus on problem areas, and all of that was pretext for what is called the Strong Cities Network. And finally, we look at the Strong Cities Network and we see that it will include an international steering committee of approximately 25 cities and other subnational entities from different regions that will provide the Strong Cities Network with the strategic direction that the UN directs. And I've said that if we can't govern ourselves, and if the police can't govern us, and if the governors can't govern, the United Nations or some external force could be appointed by the United Nations or some world body, and they call it the Strong Cities Network. It's been in the charter for the 2030 summit, along with green deals and getting rid of poverty, creating scarcity, post-scarcity, all this. And so they would convene this international advisory board, which would include representatives from a lot of relevant city-focused networks to say, well, what can we do to dismantle these parts of the police force? And then we need to have that help to ensure that the Strong Cities networks would be built upon their work. And we know that when they did the Event 201 and they were doing the simulations of the diseases prior to COVID-19, they were saying the only way we're going to be able to enforce all of the lockdowns, enforcing all of the separation, social distancing, is with what would be strategic dialogue, think and do tanks, longstanding ways of doing so, like contact tracing, all of this to bring into perspective a controlled area or something that would prevent violent extremism, because they know that people are not going to take being locked down forever. They're not going to like it, and we're seeing that now. Remember, there are no Congress decisions and no input from the people with regards to Strong Cities networks. There's no talk of how this will create a means for more freedom and safety either, okay? So when you're looking at this plan of Strong Cities, it could be given another name, but it's nothing less than the overriding of American laws up to and including the United States Constitution in favor of the United Nations laws that would henceforth be implemented in the United States itself without any Constitution or Congress or any speaking of that. Just take a look at what violent extremism looks like to other countries. We look at other countries, we say, well, we're glad we're not them. But here we are in the same position, and the threat or possibility of the expansion of the UN Strong Cities network and police actions that justify deadly force in a country that says it's the home of the free, we're the beacon, whatever. And see, those who live under the gun and wish to rebel will be the new terrorists. You see. And I also find it odd that no one is even bringing up the idea that after the riots in the country died down and a new police force could be proposed and they defund the other police forces, that there would certainly be a concerted effort to disarm you. Okay? The next phase is to disarm Americans. Part of the dilemma for anyone who truly wants to understand these actions and reactions is that, quote, nothing they do within the circles of power and greed seems to make any logical sense. And so just before the 9/11 attacks, there were a few movies that were released that seemed to be a form of cruel predictive programming about rounding up suspected enemies of the state. I mean, one particular film was called The Siege. If you remember, it had Denzel Washington in it, Bruce Willis. And what happened is it confronted all of these societal themes that we're in the middle of now, all these predicting the rise of a police state, the freedom of the individual in question, round-the-clock surveillance, the corruption of government, totalitarianism, weaponization, groupthink, mass marketing, nonlinear warfare, hybrid warfare, the tendency of humankind to meekly accept their lot in life as a prisoner in a prison of their own making. Meaning that, like I said, one of the greatest experiments were they told us to lock ourselves in our cells, and we did so. We decided to enforce house arrest because of a disease. And when you look at these films, too, it's illustrated how Americans can become indifferent to the idea of police violence and jailing people or putting people in camps and cages without due process because of the crisis or perceived crisis. There is no decency. There is no moral agency, only that you have to comply. You don't comply, you get pushed to the ground and you bleed from your ears. You don't comply, you get a knee to the neck and you die. You see, the film of The Siege, the film, had some basic evidence that there is this slippery slope involved here. And that is that there's a revelation that perhaps there could be prison camps being created in the real world in order to jail American citizens during a possible time of declared martial law by the president, which we are almost there now. And there are over 800 prison camps in the United States. We talked about the COVID camps in Goldendale, Washington. We talked about them in other parts of